So this right here, guys, is a huge deal, if you ask me. And I think this goes to show you a pretty big difference between Brazil and the United States. So this is in the New York Times. They say Brazil bars Bolsonaro from office for election fraud claims. Brazil's electoral court banned former President Jair Bolsonaro from seeking office until 2030 for spreading false claims about the nation's voting system. So look, in many ways, this is super analogous to January 6th here in the U.S. And by the way, they had a very similar thing happen. You guys remember, we covered it. Very similar thing happened with the Brazilian government. I mean, it was astonishing, the parallels to January 6th here. So they say Brazilian election officials on Friday blocked former President Jair Bolsonaro from seeking public office until 2030, removing a top contender from the next presidential contest and dealing a significant blow to the country's far-right movement. Brazil's electoral court ruled that Mr. Bolsonaro had violated Brazil's election laws when, less than 3 months ahead of last year's vote, he called diplomats to the presidential palace and made baseless claims that the nation's voting systems were likely to be rigged against him. 5 of the court's 7 judges voted that Mr. Bolsonaro had abused his power as president when he convened the meeting with diplomats and broadcast it on state television. Quote, "This response will confirm our faith in the democracy," said Alexander de Moraes, a Supreme Court justice who leads the electoral court, as he cast his vote against Mr. Bolsonaro. The decision is a sharp and swift rebuke of Mr. Bolsonaro and his effort to undermine Brazil's elections. Just 6 months ago, Mr. Bolsonaro was president of one of the world's largest democracies. Now his career as a politician is in jeopardy. Under the ruling, Bolsonaro, 68, will next be able to run for president in 2030 when he is 75. By the way, if he's around, he might just do that. The next presidential election is scheduled for 2026. Mr. Bolsonaro said Friday that he was not surprised by the 5-2 decision, 5-2, because the court had always been against him. Quote, "Come on, we know that since I took office, they said I was going to carry out a coup," he told reporters, though he too had hinted at that possibility. This is not a democracy. His lawyers had argued that his speech to diplomats was an act of government aimed at raising legitimate concerns about election security. Mr. Bolsonaro appeared to accept his fate, saying Friday that he would focus on campaigning for other right-wing candidates. Yet he is still expected to appeal the ruling to Brazil's Supreme Court, though that body acted aggressively to rein in his power during his presidency. He has harshly attacked the High Court for years, calling some justices terrorists and accusing them of trying to sway the vote against him. So, man, crashing and burning. And this is an example of actions actually having consequences, right? Now, look, I think it would be a different story with Bolsonaro if he did the election denialism, but nothing came about as a result of it, right? I think it'd be a different scenario if he just said some things, but there was no action accompanying those words. Because then you can make an argument, hey, it's free speech, he might be wrong, or he might even be lying, but you're allowed to just say stuff, right? That's not a crime. That's the whole point of the First Amendment, is like, you could say, even if things are wrong, you're allowed to say them, right? Like that's a basic freedom. That's a basic human right, or at the very least it should be. But I think the issue, from my perspective at least, with Bolsonaro is that the talk actually did go hand in hand with actions, right? Like, it did go hand in hand with their own version of a January 6th. And, look, you effed around and you found out. So when you look at this, my immediate response was like, well, something akin to this absolutely should have been done vis-a-vis Trump after January 6th. Now, you might say, well, hold on now, Kyle. They have a different legal system, a different government. There's no way we can do something like that here. There's no, process by which you can go through to get to that desired outcome. But if you say that, I'd have to inform you, you are indeed incorrect. So in our Constitution, 14th Amendment, equal protection and other rights, Section 3 is about disqualification from holding office. Interesting. Here's what they say. No person shall be a senator or representative in Congress or elector of president and vice president, or hold any office, civil or military, under the United States or under any state, who, having previously taken an oath as a member of Congress, or as an officer of the United States, or as a member of any state legislature, or as an executive or judicial officer of any state to support the Constitution of the United States, shall have engaged in insurrection or rebellion against the same, or given aid or comfort to the enemies thereof. But Congress may by a vote of 2/3 of each house, remove such disability. So in other words, and this, guys, go back and look at the commentary. I said this immediately after January 6th too, that I don't know if Trump actually broke any particular law. He was flirting with it. He was saying things that were super questionable and wrong at best, lies at worst, but didn't cross a line into any like imminent cause for violence, etc., right? He spoke out of both sides of his mouth on that day. But what I did say is, it's not even a judicial process. It's a congressional process. It's a legislative process. If you can get 2/3 of Congress to say, we know what you did here. Yeah, it was a wink and a nod and, you tried to cover your tracks. But everybody knows what you did here. Everybody saw the speech where he said, you got to be strong. You got to take our country back with strength. You can't be weak. Everybody, let's march to the Capitol. That's what happened. He was also trying to prod Mike Pence. Hey, man, do the right thing. Throw out the results of the election. This is all on the record. Internally, his staffers were like, yeah, it was very obvious what was going on. He was sitting there watching it, hoping it would succeed on January 6th. And then eventually, after too much pressure, he went out there and said, hi, everybody, go home. You're right. I love you, but you got to go home. So it was clear what happened, right? Anybody who's minimally honest and has eyes knows, like, yeah, we know what he wanted as the desired outcome, what he wanted to occur. Insurrection or rebellion is fair. Now, didn't it come anywhere close to working? That doesn't matter, right? The intent was there and the actions were in place. So if at the time 2/3 of Congress said, you can't run for office again, you can't be president, you can't be senator, you can't be a congressman, no position of authority in the U.S. government, you can't do it because you violated the U.S. Constitution, 14th Amendment, Section 3. You violated it. You are now disqualified from office. Now, it would have required 2/3, which is very difficult to get, right? But I think that if the Republican Party, if the elected Republicans, I should be clear, if the Republican establishment knew back then what they know now, that Trump has got like 60% of the primary vote, he's almost certainly going to be their nominee, right? I think they would have been like, let's do it. There's enough establishment Republicans and enough of an acknowledgement how toxic he is for a general election when they lost the midterms massively and his handpicked candidates did the worst. I think they would do it to save their own political asses. Like, let's get him out of here. Let's get him off the table. Let's just end this nightmare so that we have a chance moving forward. I think they would have done it. And I think they would have been right to do it. But they didn't do it because they're weak. They're weak. They're scared of the power that he has with the base. And so they cuck themselves and they bend the knee repeatedly. But you would have had every single Democratic vote for this. Every one. And you would have needed some Republicans in order to get it done. They should have done it, man. They should have done it. Now, I wish there was also some sort of a procedure where you can ban him from office that's not legislative and congressional in nature. I wish there was something, either judicial or otherwise, no confidence type thing, whatever you want to call it. I wish there were certain things we could do vis-a-vis Dianne Feinstein, for example, who's literally like, her brain just doesn't function anymore. She has no business being in the Senate. I wish there was something we could do about Donald Trump and the fact that he's a criminal. But all we have at this point is, the Jack Smith investigation, the Georgia investigation, and you could just hope for the best on that front. But I think Brazil got it right. I think they got it right. I think that in order to defend democracy, you need to make sure that the outright opponents of democracy, who would use democracy against itself to institute authoritarianism, you have to call a spade, right? And there's quotes of Jair Bolsonaro. We've covered them. Like, he says, like, I'm a fascist, or I'm an authoritarian, or I believe in a dictatorship. That's the proper form of government. It's like, okay, well, you mix that belief system with the fact that you really did try to get the ball moving, to keep your ass in power, to do your own January 6th. Okay, you messed around, and now you're going to find out. And so credit to the Brazilian courts for calling a spade and protecting democracy by taking off the field an enemy of democracy. I really don't think it's that difficult of an issue. I think it's the right thing to do. I think there needs to be consequences for people who act in the way that he acted and the way Trump acted. But Trump seems to skirt accountability most of the time. But we'll see what happens with all the cases against him. But anyway, there you have it. Bolsonaro out for 10 years. That's something. All right, guys, that is the show. I love y'all very much. Thank you, as always, for listening to me babble. You know the shameless plugs. Please click like. Please click subscribe. The most important thing is subscribe. We're trying to build that subscriber base as much as possible. It helps us get around the algorithm, which is not too kind to political channels, as you all know. Also, click that bell icon so you get a notification every single time a new video drops. I'm happy to be back from vacation. I was itching to get back on the air. Clearly, I'm not in the studio today, but nonetheless, I had to get on here and run my mouth. It's just in my nature. I had to do it. So remember, guys, you could always listen to the full audio version of the podcast over on Spotify if you'd like to do that. There was an issue with it the other day where it was like a shorter clip, but we're making sure to double check and make sure we get the full thing up. So if you want to listen to the full audio podcast, you can do that. And for everybody who supports the show already on Patreon or by tipping on YouTube, I love you guys to death. We couldn't do this without you. I've never had a conversation with an advertiser. I'm very proud of that fact. You guys make that possible. So please consider supporting the show on Patreon. The link's in the video description box below. And consider supporting Crystal Kyle and Friends on Substack. If you pay $5 a month, you get the video of every interview and you get it a day early. Everybody else can get the free audio version of it and they get it a day later. But we appreciate any support that you guys can give over there as well. And that's all I got for you guys, man. I love you guys. I'll talk to everybody tomorrow. Have a great rest of your day. Hey, y'all, do me a favor and like and subscribe. It helps out big time in the algorithm. Click the bell as well for notifications when videos drop. And watch that video on screen right now. You know you want to.